I returned from work to discover my son bleeding and crying in his room. The babysitter said, "He fell down the stairs while I was in the bathroom. It happened so fast, I'm so sorry." But when I looked at the baby monitor recordings, I called the police immediately. The blood was everywhere, not splattered dramatically like in movies, but smeared across Oliver's cheek in a thin line that started at his temple and disappeared into his hairline. His Spider-Man shirt had a dark wet patch near the collar, and when I knelt beside him on his bedroom floor, I could see his hands were trembling the same way mine did after car accidents. He was 4 years old. 4-year-olds shouldn't know that kind of trembling. Ashley stood in the doorway behind me, her phone clutched in both hands, and I remember thinking how strange it was that she hadn't put it down yet. She kept saying she was sorry, kept saying it happened so fast, kept saying she'd been in the bathroom when she heard the crash. My son wouldn't look at me. He stared at the carpet with this blank expression that made my stomach drop, and when I asked him what happened, he just shook his head. The movement was so small I almost missed it. I'd hired Ashley 11 months earlier through an agency my sister recommended. She was 23, studying early childhood education at the community college, and she'd passed every background check the agency required. During the interview at a coffee shop downtown, she'd shown me a binder full of references from other families, photographs of smiling kids at parks and museums, certificates from CPR training and child development courses. She talked about wanting to work with children who had speech delays because her younger brother had overcome a stutter with the right support. Oliver had been struggling with his words since his mother died 18 months before, and something about Ashley's patience during that first meeting made me think she'd be good for him. She started the following Monday, 3 days a week from 3 in the afternoon, until I got home around 7. For almost a year, everything had seemed fine. Better than fine. Oliver started using more words. He smiled more. He'd run to the door when I came home to tell me about parks and painting and the songs Ashley taught him. I'd started to feel like maybe we were going to be okay. Now I carried him to the kitchen and wet a clean dish towel with warm water. The cut on his forehead wasn't deep, but head wounds bleed like horror shows, and I had to keep wiping to see how bad it actually was. Ashley followed us, still apologizing, explaining that she'd needed to use the bathroom, and Oliver had been playing in his room, and she'd heard this terrible sound from the stairs. She'd found him at the bottom, she said. He must have opened his bedroom door and tried to go down by himself. It happened so fast. She kept repeating that phrase. It happened so fast. I asked Oliver if that was true, if he'd tried to go downstairs by himself, and he just stared at the table. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't nod or shake his head, just stared with that same blank look that made something cold settle in my chest. I told Ashley she should go home. She asked if I was sure, if there was anything she could do, if she should stay in case I needed help. I said no. I needed her to leave. The relief that crossed her face lasted maybe half a second before she rearranged it into concern, but I saw it. I definitely saw it. After she left, I cleaned Oliver's cut properly and put a bandage over it. The bleeding had mostly stopped. I made him mac and cheese from a box because that was his favorite, but he only ate 3 bites before pushing the bowl away. I asked him again what happened, tried every gentle approach I'd learned from the grief counselor we'd seen after his mother's death, but he wouldn't talk. He just wanted to watch cartoons. I let him, sitting beside him on the couch with my laptop open, pretending to answer work emails while my mind ran through everything Ashley had said. Something felt wrong. The timeline felt wrong. Oliver's room was at the end of the hallway upstairs, and the bathroom was right next to it. If she'd been in the bathroom and he'd opened his door, she would have heard the door, wouldn't she? Our house was old, and that door creaked like a dying cat. Every door in the house did. You couldn't open one without announcing it to everyone home. Around 9 that night, after I'd put Oliver to bed and sat with him until he fell asleep, I remembered the baby monitor. We'd installed a camera system when Oliver was an infant, back when his mother was alive and we were the kind of paranoid new parents who checked the video feed every 15 minutes. After she died, I'd kept the cameras running mostly out of habit, and because the grief counselor said routine was important for Oliver's stability. One camera pointed at his crib, which we'd converted to a toddler bed the previous year. Another camera covered the hallway outside his room. I'd never thought to check the footage before. Why would I? But now I opened the app on my phone and scrolled back to that afternoon. The timestamp showed 5:43 p.m. when I'd gotten home. I rewound to 5:30, then 5 o'clock, then 4:30, watching the sped-up footage of Oliver's empty hallway. At 4:18 p.m., Oliver's door opened and he came out carrying his stuffed elephant. He walked toward the stairs. Normal. A 4-year-old going to find his babysitter. Then Ashley appeared in the frame. She was walking toward him from the direction of the stairs, not the bathroom. She reached him in 3 steps, and what happened next made my hands start shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. She grabbed his arm and yanked him backward, hard enough that his feet left the floor for a second. He dropped the elephant. I watched her lean down close to his face, her mouth moving, saying something I couldn't hear because I'd never bothered upgrading to cameras with audio. Then she dragged him back toward his room. Not led him, dragged him. His feet scrambled against the carpet, trying to keep up. The door closed. The hallway stayed empty for 6 minutes. When the door opened again, Ashley walked out alone, pulling the door shut behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at her phone, then walked toward the stairs and disappeared from frame. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I watched it 4 more times. Each time, my hands shook harder. Each time, I noticed new details. The way Oliver had reached for his elephant after she grabbed him. The way his mouth had been open like he was crying, though no sound came through. The way Ashley had checked her phone immediately after leaving his room, casual, like nothing had happened. I checked the camera in Oliver's room next. The angle wasn't perfect, because I'd positioned it to watch his bed for safety, not surveillance, but I could see about 2/3 of the room. At 4:19 p.m., Ashley pulled Oliver into frame. She was still gripping his arm. She pushed him, and he fell against his toy chest. The impact wasn't huge, but he was 4 and small, and the corner of that chest was solid wood. He put his hand to his head when he stood up. Then Ashley moved toward him again, out of frame, and I couldn't see what happened next. The camera just showed his empty bed and part of his bookshelf for 3 minutes. When Ashley walked back into frame at 4:22, she was alone. She glanced toward where Oliver must have been, then left the room. I sat on my couch at 9:30 p.m. on a Wednesday night with my son asleep upstairs and tried to understand what I'd just watched. My brain kept offering explanations. Maybe he'd done something dangerous and she'd reacted poorly. Maybe she'd been trying to prevent him from falling down the stairs and I was misinterpreting her body language. Maybe the camera angle made it look worse than it was. But I'd watched it 5 times. I'd seen how hard she grabbed him. I'd seen him fall against that toy chest. I'd seen her check her phone afterward like it was nothing. And I'd heard her lie to my face about being in the bathroom, about finding him at the bottom of the stairs, about it all happening so fast. None of that was true. Not one word. I called the non-emergency police line because I didn't know what else to do. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in immediate danger, and I said no. My son was asleep and the babysitter had gone home, but I had video evidence of her hurting him and lying about it. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said she was sending an officer to take a report. Detective Amy Thornton arrived 35 minutes later with a uniformed officer whose name I immediately forgot. Detective Thornton was maybe 40, with gray starting in her dark hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much of humanity's worst. She sat at my kitchen table and asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I told her about coming home to find Oliver bleeding, about Ashley's story, about the videos. She asked to see them. I showed her on my phone, then emailed her the files from the app's cloud storage. She watched without expression, then watched again, then asked if I had footage from earlier in the day. I pulled up the feed from 3 p.m. when Ashley usually arrived. For the first hour, everything looked normal. Ashley and Oliver played with blocks in his room. They read books. Around 4 o'clock, she took him downstairs, out of the camera's range. They came back up at 4:15. Oliver went to his bookshelf and pulled out his elephant. Ashley sat on his bed looking at her phone. Then Oliver left the room with the elephant, and I watched the hallway camera show what I'd already seen. Ashley following him, grabbing him, dragging him back. Detective Thornton asked to see the in-room footage again, specifically the part where Oliver fell against the toy chest. She watched it 3 times, leaning close to my phone screen. Then she asked if I'd taken Oliver to a doctor. I said no, the cut seemed minor and I'd cleaned it. She said I needed to take him first thing in the morning and have the doctor document everything. Photographs, measurements, written notes about his behavior and demeanor. She said this kind of case would require medical evidence. The uniformed officer went upstairs to photograph Oliver's room while Detective Thornton took my statement. She asked detailed questions about Ashley's employment, how I'd found her, how long she'd worked for us, whether I'd noticed anything concerning before tonight. I said no. Everything had seemed fine until now. She asked about Oliver's mother, and I explained that she'd died in a car accident when Oliver was 2, that it had been just the 2 of us for 18 months, that Ashley had been the first person I'd trusted to help care for him. Detective Thornton wrote everything down in a notebook with careful printing. She asked if Ashley had keys to my house. I said yes. She suggested I change the locks tomorrow. She asked if I'd confronted Ashley about the videos. I said no, I'd called the police instead. She said that was good, that I shouldn't contact Ashley at all, that anything I said to her could complicate the investigation. When the uniformed officer came back downstairs, he had photographs on his camera of Oliver's room from multiple angles, the toy chest, the bloodstains on Oliver's carpet that I hadn't noticed in my panic earlier. Detective Thornton said they'd need to interview Oliver, but not tonight. He needed to sleep. She gave me her card and said she'd arrange for a forensic interviewer, someone specially trained to talk to young children about traumatic events. She said the interview would probably happen Friday, that they'd want Oliver to have a day to settle first. She said not to ask Oliver about what happened, not to show him the videos, not to tell him the police were involved. Just act normal, she said. Keep his routine stable. Let the professionals handle the interview. I asked what would happen to Ashley. Detective Thornton said that depended on the evidence and the forensic interview and what the district attorney decided. She said cases involving childcare providers were taken seriously. She said I'd done the right thing by calling. After they left, I went upstairs and stood in Oliver's doorway watching him sleep. His stuffed elephant was tucked under his arm. The bandage on his forehead looked stark white against his skin in the dim glow from his nightlight. I thought about how many times I'd left him alone with Ashley, 3 days a week for 11 months. roughly 140 afternoons. How many of those afternoons had involved something I didn't know about? How many times had she hurt him while I sat in meetings at work, trusting her, believing his smiles when I came home meant everything was fine? The thought made me want to vomit. I'd failed him. His mother was dead, and I was all he had, and I'd left him with someone who yanked him hard enough to lift him off the floor and pushed him into furniture and then lied about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hallway outside his room with my laptop and went through every saved video file from the past 11 months. The camera system kept recordings for 90 days before automatically deleting them, so I could only review the past 3 months. But I watched all of it. Most of it showed exactly what I'd always thought. Ashley and Oliver playing, reading, coloring, watching educational shows together, normal babysitter activities. But scattered throughout, I found moments that made my skin crawl. On September 15th, I watched Ashley grab Oliver's wrist and squeeze when he didn't want to put away his toys. Hard enough that he cried. She let go and he ran to his bed, and she stood there looking at her phone until he stopped crying. On October 3rd, she shoved him when he spilled juice on the carpet. Not hard enough to make him fall, but hard enough to send him stumbling. On October 28th, she yanked his arm while pulling him toward the bathroom, the same way she'd done in yesterday's video. Each incident lasted seconds. Each was followed by Ashley acting normal, playing with him, reading to him, like nothing had happened. I compiled every clip into a folder and sent it to Detective Thornton at 3 a.m. with a timestamp log I'd created. She emailed back at 6:15 a.m. saying she'd received the files and would review them. She reminded me not to contact Ashley. She said the forensic interviewer was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. at the Child Advocacy Center downtown. She said to bring Oliver and plan for the interview to take 1 to 2 hours. I called my boss at 7 a.m. and said I had a family emergency and needed the rest of the week off. He didn't ask questions. I'd worked there for 9 years and had never taken emergency leave before. He just said to take whatever time I needed and let him know if there was anything he could do. Oliver woke up at 7:30 and came downstairs asking for breakfast. I made him pancakes and tried to act normal even though my hands were still shaking from not sleeping and from what I'd watched all night. He ate 4 bites and pushed his plate away. I asked if his head hurt. He nodded. I gave him children's ibuprofen and told him we were going to see Dr. Kim today just to make sure his OE was healing okay. He asked if Ashley was coming today. My throat closed up. I managed to say no. Ashley wasn't coming anymore. Daddy was going to stay home with him instead. He nodded and went back to his cartoons. I called Dr. Kim's office when they opened at 8 o'clock and explained the situation to the nurse. She put me through to Dr. Kim directly. I told him I needed Oliver examined and documented for a police investigation involving his babysitter. He said to bring Oliver in at 9:30, he'd make time. Dr. Kim had been Oliver's pediatrician since birth. He was in his 50s, Korean American, with 2 kids of his own and photographs of them all over his office. He examined Oliver carefully, measuring the cut on his forehead, checking for other injuries, asking Oliver gentle questions about whether anything else hurt. Oliver said his arm hurt. Dr. Kim examined both arms and found bruising on his right bicep, 4 small oval marks that looked exactly like fingerprints. He photographed them with a medical camera, then printed the photos and added them to Oliver's file. He asked Oliver how he got the bruises. Oliver said Ashley grabbed him. Dr. Kim asked if Ashley grabbed him a lot. Oliver said sometimes. Dr. Kim asked if Ashley ever hurt him on purpose. Oliver went quiet and wouldn't answer. Dr. Kim didn't push. He finished the examination, documented everything in his notes, and printed me a copy. He said he was required to file a report with Child Protective Services. I said the police were already investigating. He said he'd still need to file the medical report. It was standard protocol in suspected abuse cases. He asked if I needed anything else. I asked if Oliver would be okay. Dr. Kim said physically, yes, the injuries were minor and would heal. Psychologically, he couldn't say. He recommended a child therapist who specialized in trauma. He wrote the name and number on his prescription pad and handed it to me. Ashley called me at 11 a.m. while Oliver and I were driving home from the doctor's office. I didn't answer. She called again at 11:30. Again at noon. She left a voicemail asking if Oliver was okay, if I needed her to come in today, if everything was all right. Her voice sounded normal, concerned, exactly like it had sounded when she'd lied to my face the night before. I deleted the voicemail and blocked her number. She texted from a different number at 2 p.m. I know you're upset. I understand. Can we please talk about what happened? I didn't respond. Detective Thornton called me at 3 o'clock and said Ashley had contacted her asking about the investigation. I asked if she was allowed to do that. Detective Thornton said anyone could contact the police, but Ashley didn't have a right to information about an ongoing investigation. She said Ashley's attorney had called too. I hadn't known Ashley had an attorney. Detective Thornton said she must have hired one that morning. She said that was common when people knew they were under investigation. She asked if Ashley had contacted me. I said yes, multiple times. Detective Thornton said to keep not responding and to document every attempt Ashley made to contact me. Thursday crawled past. I kept Oliver home and tried to maintain his normal routine. We played with blocks. We read books. We watched his favorite shows. He was quieter than usual, clingy in a way he hadn't been since the months right after his mother died. He wanted me in sight at all times. If I went to the kitchen to make lunch, he followed. If I went to the bathroom, he waited outside the door. When I tried to put him down for his afternoon nap, he cried until I agreed to lay down next to him. I held him until he fell asleep, and then I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I'd left him alone with someone who hurt him, thinking about how I'd paid her to take care of him, how I'd trusted her completely, how Oliver had seemed happy, or at least I'd thought he was happy, but maybe he'd just been scared and I'd been too busy working to notice. Ashley sent another text Thursday evening from yet another number. Please, I need to explain. It's not what you think. What happened to Oliver was an accident. I'm so sorry, but please let me explain. I showed the text to Detective Thornton when she called for an update. She said to keep not responding. She said the forensic interview was still scheduled for Friday morning at 10 o'clock. She said a detective from the Special Victims Unit would be there too, and someone from Child Protective Services. She said they'd want to ask me questions after Oliver's interview. She said to prepare for it to be a long day. Friday morning, I dressed Oliver in comfortable clothes and told him we were going to meet some nice people who wanted to hear about what happened with Ashley. He asked if he was in trouble. God, that question. I knelt down so we were eye level and promised him he wasn't in trouble. He hadn't done anything wrong. These people just wanted to help make sure he was safe. He asked if Ashley was coming back. I said no. He nodded and held my hand as we walked to the car. The Child Advocacy Center was in a converted house downtown, painted cheerful yellow with a playground in the fenced backyard. It didn't look like a police station. That was intentional, I learned later. They designed these places to feel safe and non-threatening for kids. A woman named Jennifer Clark met us in the lobby. She was the forensic interviewer, mid-30s, with a warm smile and a gentle voice that immediately put Oliver at ease. She explained that she was going to talk to Oliver alone in a special room while I waited in a different room where I could watch on a video monitor. She said the conversation would be recorded. She said I couldn't interrupt or coach Oliver, but I could watch the whole thing. She knelt down and asked Oliver if he liked to draw. He nodded. She said she had a whole room full of art supplies, and they were going to draw pictures together while they talked. He went with her willingly, and a victim advocate named Lisa showed me to the observation room. I watched on a screen as Jennifer sat with Oliver at a small table in a room decorated like a playroom. She started by asking him easy questions. What's your favorite color? What do you like to eat? Do you have any pets? Oliver answered in his small voice, gradually relaxing. Jennifer asked if he knew why he was here. He shook his head. She said sometimes when grown-ups were worried about kids staying safe, they asked special interviewers like her to talk to the kids and find out how they were feeling. She asked if anyone had hurt him or made him feel scared recently. He nodded. She asked who. He said Ashley. Jennifer asked him to tell her about a time Ashley made him feel scared. Oliver talked about Wednesday, about wanting to go downstairs to find Ashley, about her getting mad and grabbing his arm. Jennifer asked what happened after she grabbed his arm. Oliver said she pulled him back to his room. Jennifer asked what happened in his room. Oliver said she pushed him, and he fell and hit his head. Jennifer asked if Ashley had hurt him other times. Oliver nodded. Jennifer asked him to tell her about another time. Oliver described the juice spilling incident from October, then the wrist squeezing from September. Then other things I hadn't seen on the cameras because they'd happened outside his room or outside the camera angles. I watched my 4-year-old son describe months of abuse in his small, halting voice, and I had to leave the observation room twice to vomit in the bathroom. The victim advocate, Lisa, followed me both times and stood outside the stall asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. I would never be okay again. I'd left my child with someone who hurt him, and he'd been too scared to tell me, and I'd kept paying her and trusting her and leaving him alone with her. When I came back to the observation room the second time, Detective Thornton was there. She said she'd reviewed all the video files I'd sent. She said combined with Oliver's disclosure and the medical evidence, she had enough to arrest Ashley. She said she'd already obtained a warrant. She said officers were executing it that afternoon. Oliver's interview lasted 90 minutes. When Jennifer brought him back to the lobby, he ran to me and buried his face against my leg. Jennifer said he'd done great, that he'd been very brave, that she had everything she needed. She gave him a small stuffed bear and told him he could keep it to remember how brave he was. Then she asked if I could come to a different room for my interview. Lisa offered to stay with Oliver in the lobby, and he agreed after I promised I'd be right back. I followed Jennifer and Detective Thornton to a conference room where another detective was waiting. He introduced himself as Detective Paul Garrett from the Special Victims Unit, 22 years with the department, specialized in crimes against children. He had kind eyes and a voice that probably comforted a lot of traumatized parents. It didn't comfort me. Nothing was going to comfort me. They asked me to walk through everything again. When I'd hired Ashley, what the agency had told me, whether I'd ever witnessed her being inappropriate with Oliver, whether Oliver had ever seemed afraid of her or reluctant to be left alone with her. I said no to both. I said he'd always seemed happy to see her. They asked if I'd noticed the behavioral changes in Oliver over the past few months. I said what changes. They said according to Oliver's interview, Ashley had been hurting him since at least September, possibly longer. Had I noticed him becoming more withdrawn, more clingy, having more nightmares, regressing in his speech or toilet training? I thought about it. Really thought about it. And I realized, yes, he had been clingier in recent months. He'd started having nightmares again in October after months of sleeping through the night. He'd had a few toilet accidents in November, which hadn't happened in over a year. But I'd attributed all of it to normal childhood phases, or to lingering grief about his mother, or to developmental fluctuations. I'd never once considered that someone might be hurting him. Detective Garrett asked if I'd be willing to participate in a controlled call with Ashley. I asked what that meant. He explained that I would call her while detectives recorded the conversation, and I would try to get her to admit what she'd done. I said yes, immediately. He said they'd set it up for Monday. He said in the meantime, Ashley would be arrested and arraigned. He said she'd likely post bail. He said I should be prepared for her to contact me again, and I should continue not responding except for the controlled call. Detective Thornton added that Child Protective Services would be opening a case, standard procedure in substantiated child abuse. A caseworker would visit my home to ensure Oliver was safe with me and that I was taking appropriate protective measures. She said it wasn't an accusation against me, just part of the process. We left the Child Advocacy Center at 1 p.m. I took Oliver to his favorite burger place for lunch, even though he only ate half his meal. Then we went to the park, and I pushed him on the swings for an hour while he laughed in that pure way kids laugh when they feel safe. That sound made me want to cry. We went home and built a blanket fort in the living room and watched movies inside it until dinner. I made chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs, and he ate 6 of them, which was more than he'd eaten at any meal since Wednesday. After dinner, we read 5 books at bedtime instead of the usual 2. When I turned off his light, he asked if Ashley was ever coming back. I promised she wasn't. He asked if Daddy was going to stay home with him now. I said yes. For a while, Daddy was going to stay home. He asked if I was mad at him. That question broke me. I sat on his bed and pulled him into my lap and told him I could never, ever be mad at him for what happened. That none of it was his fault. That Ashley was the one who did wrong, not him. I told him I loved him more than anything in the world. I told him I was sorry I hadn't protected him better. He fell asleep in my arms, and I sat there holding him for another 20 minutes before I could make myself put him down. Ashley was arrested Friday evening. Detective Thornton called to tell me. She said Ashley had been charged with multiple counts of child abuse and assault. She said the arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning. She said I didn't need to attend, but I could if I wanted to. I said I wanted to. She said Ashley's bail was set at $15,000. She said Ashley would probably post it. I asked what happened if she did. Detective Thornton said there would be conditions. No contact with me or Oliver. Stay away from our home and Oliver's preschool. Surrender her passport. She said if Ashley violated any conditions, she'd go back to jail. That night, my sister called. I'd texted her earlier saying Oliver was okay, but something had happened with the babysitter. She demanded details. I told her everything. She cried. Then she offered to come stay with us for a while. I said yes. She arrived Saturday morning with her suitcase and groceries and took over my kitchen like she owned it. Having her there helped. Oliver adored his aunt, and she kept him distracted while I dealt with police calls and CPS scheduling, and the lawyer Detective Thornton recommended I consult. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. The CPS caseworker visited Sunday afternoon. Her name was Rachel Torres, young and earnest with a clipboard and a kind manner. She toured my house, asked about my employment and childcare plans, verified that I'd changed the locks and installed a security system. She interviewed Oliver briefly, asking if he felt safe at home with Daddy, if anyone was hurting him now, if he had any worries. He said no to everything except the last question, and his worry was whether he could have ice cream after dinner. Rachel laughed and said that was a very reasonable worry. She told me her report would recommend the case be closed after the criminal investigation concluded, assuming no further concerns arose. She said I was doing everything right. I didn't feel like I was doing anything right. I felt like I'd failed catastrophically and was now scrambling to fix what I should have prevented. Monday morning, I attended Ashley's arraignment. My sister stayed home with Oliver. The courtroom was small and cold, institutional beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Ashley was brought in wearing civilian clothes, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked tired and young and nothing like a child abuser, which I suppose was the point. People who hurt kids look like everyone else. That's why they get away with it. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The judge read the charges aloud. 4 counts of child abuse, 2 counts of assault on a minor, 1 count of filing a false police report for the 911 call she'd made Wednesday night, claiming Oliver had fallen. I hadn't known about that call. The prosecutor said the state had extensive video evidence and medical documentation. The judge maintained the bail at $15,000 and the no-contact conditions. Ashley's mother posted bail that afternoon. The controlled call happened Monday evening. I sat in a police conference room with Detective Garrett and another detective monitoring the recording equipment. They'd coached me on what to say. Don't accuse her directly. Express confusion and concern. Let her talk. People who think they can explain their way out of trouble often confess while trying to justify themselves. I called Ashley's number at 7 p.m. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded relieved. She said my name like a question. I said I wanted to understand what happened, that I was confused, that the police were saying things that didn't make sense. She said they were twisting everything, that it had all been an accident, that she'd never meant to hurt Oliver. I asked what she meant by accident. She said Wednesday, When Oliver fell, she'd only been trying to stop him from going down the stairs by himself because it was dangerous. I said the police showed me videos. She went quiet. Then she said the videos didn't show the full context, that Oliver could be difficult sometimes, that I didn't see what happened when I wasn't home. I asked what happened when I wasn't home. She said sometimes Oliver didn't listen and she had to be firm with him, but she never meant to hurt him. She was just trying to teach him to behave. I asked if she'd grabbed him hard enough to bruise him. She said he bruised easily, that kids bruise from normal play, that I was overreacting. I asked if pushing him into his toy chest was normal play. She said that was an accident. He'd lost his balance. Her story kept changing. Detective Garrett was writing notes rapidly. I stayed on the phone for 23 minutes while Ashley tried to justify everything she'd done. She admitted grabbing Oliver multiple times. She admitted that he'd fallen against furniture but claimed it was always accidental. She admitted being frustrated with him but said that was normal. All caregivers got frustrated sometimes. She never quite admitted intentionally hurting him, but she admitted enough. When I finally hung up, Detective Garrett said that was good. That was very good. That her admissions about grabbing Oliver and about the furniture incidents would help their case significantly. He said the recording would be added to the evidence file. He said the prosecutor would likely use it during plea negotiations or at trial. Trial never happened. Ashley's attorney contacted the prosecutor Wednesday morning to discuss a plea deal. The prosecutor called to ask my opinion. She introduced herself as Deputy District Attorney Vanessa Kim, 8 years in the office, 5 years prosecuting crimes against children. She said Ashley was offering to plead guilty to 2 counts of child abuse in exchange for the other charges being dropped and a sentencing recommendation of 18 months in county jail with 3 years probation. She said if we went to trial, Ashley could get more time, but trials were unpredictable and would require Oliver to potentially testify. She asked what I wanted. I said I wanted my son to never have to think about this again. I said if a plea deal meant Oliver didn't have to testify, I supported it. She said she'd accept the deal. Ashley pleaded guilty 3 weeks later. I attended the plea hearing. Oliver stayed home with my sister. The judge asked Ashley if she understood she was giving up her right to a trial, if anyone had forced or threatened her to take this deal, if she understood the consequences of pleading guilty. She said yes to everything. The judge asked if she wanted to make a statement. Her attorney advised her not to. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. Ashley looked at me once during the hearing, and I couldn't read her expression. Regret, maybe. Or resentment. I didn't care which. Sentencing day was February 8th. The prosecutor asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. I said yes. I'd been writing it for days, trying to find words that could explain what Ashley had done to my family. When the judge called me forward, I stood at the podium with my printed statement and tried to keep my voice steady. I talked about trusting Ashley with the most important person in my life. I talked about finding Oliver bleeding and crying while she lied to my face. I talked about discovering months of abuse captured on camera. I talked about the nightmares Oliver still had. I talked about how he flinched now when people reached for him too quickly. I talked about the therapy appointments twice a week, where he was slowly learning that not all grown-ups would hurt him. I talked about how I'd quit my job to stay home with him because he couldn't handle being left with anyone else yet. I talked about how that was a privilege, that I could afford to quit, but many parents couldn't. And I wondered how many other kids Ashley might have hurt if she'd continued working in childcare. I talked about trust and betrayal and the particular evil of hurting someone small and helpless who depended on you. When I finished, my hands were shaking and my voice had cracked twice, but I'd said everything I needed to say. The judge sentenced Ashley to 2 years in county jail and 5 years probation, more than the recommended 18 months because, the judge said, the violation of trust in a caregiving relationship was an aggravating factor. Upon release, Ashley would be prohibited from working with children in any capacity. She would be required to register as a child abuser in the state database. She would be required to complete parenting and anger management classes, even though she had no children of her own. The judge said the registration and employment prohibition would follow Ashley for the rest of her life. She was led out in handcuffs. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the prosecutor told me I should feel proud, that justice had been served, that Oliver was safe now. I didn't feel proud. I felt exhausted. I felt like we'd survived something that should never have happened. Detective Thornton was there too. She said she'd worked hundreds of child abuse cases and most didn't end with this much accountability. She said I'd done everything right after discovering what happened. She said the video evidence had made the case. I thought about luck, about how if I hadn't kept those cameras running, if I hadn't thought to check the footage, if I'd believed Ashley's lie about Oliver falling down the stairs, none of this would have happened. Ashley would still be watching other people's children. That thought made me cold. My sister was waiting at home with Oliver when I got back. He was playing with blocks in the living room, building a tower. He asked if I was done with my important grown-up thing. I said yes. He asked if we could go to the park. I said absolutely. We spent the afternoon at the park. He went down the slide 20 times and I caught him at the bottom each time. He swung so high I worried he'd fly off, but he laughed and shouted higher, higher, and I pushed him higher. He played in the sandbox with 2 other kids and didn't flinch when one of them reached past him for a shovel. Small victories. His therapist said healing wasn't linear, that there would be good days and hard days, and we should celebrate the good ones. This felt like a good one. That night after Oliver went to sleep, I sat in his room and watched him breathe. His stuffed elephant was tucked under his chin. The nightlight cast shadows on the walls. He looked peaceful. I thought about the statistics the victim advocate had shared, how most child abuse happens from someone the family knows and trusts, how it's rarely the stranger in the van but the babysitter or coach or teacher or family friend, how victims often don't tell because they're scared or they think it's normal or they don't have the words, how parents miss the signs because they're subtle or because life is busy or because they can't imagine someone they trust would do something so wrong. I'd been all of those things, busy, trusting, blind to what was happening in my own home. The guilt would probably never completely go away. But Oliver was safe now. Ashley was in jail. The locks were changed, the security system upgraded. My sister had agreed to stay for another month while Oliver and I figured out our new normal. I'd started interviewing nannies, older women with decades of experience and references I could verify personally. Oliver's therapist said he was making good progress, that kids were resilient, that with consistent safety and support, he'd likely recover well. The preschool had been understanding about his absences and had agreed to let him start part-time next month when he was ready. Things weren't okay yet, but maybe they would be. The videos were still saved in my cloud storage. I'd never be able to delete them. They were evidence, filed with the court, part of a permanent record. Sometimes late at night I thought about watching them again, trying to find earlier signs I'd missed, but I never did. I didn't need to. I knew what they showed. I knew what I'd failed to prevent. What mattered now was moving forward, making sure Oliver felt safe, making sure he knew none of it was his fault, making sure he grew up knowing his father would always believe him and protect him. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in May, Oliver and I were making pancakes in the kitchen. He was standing on his step stool cracking eggs into a bowl, completely focused on not getting shell in the batter. My sister had moved back to her own place the week before, and it was just the two of us again, finding our rhythm. Oliver had started preschool 3 days a week and seemed to enjoy it. The nightmares had decreased. He was talking more, laughing more, playing more. His therapist said we could probably reduce appointments to once a week soon. Oliver looked up from the eggs and asked if I remembered Ashley. The question surprised me. We hadn't talked about her in weeks. I said yes, I remembered her. He said he didn't miss her. Then he said he was glad she wasn't coming back. Then he said he was glad it was just us now, that Daddy was home. Then he went back to cracking eggs like it was nothing, like he hadn't just communicated the most important thing in the world. I kissed the top of his head and told him I was glad too, that it would always be just us, and I would always keep him safe, and nothing bad was going to happen to him again. He said okay, and asked if we could put chocolate chips in the pancakes. I said we could put whatever he wanted in the pancakes. We made chocolate chip pancakes with far too many chocolate chips, and they were perfect. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.